Let's move on with the next topic, and the next topic is budget and parliamentary control over the public expenditure. As you all know that we have discussed about the devices of the parliament, one of the most important accountability which has been enshrined by the government in terms of the public finances is in the parliament. So parliament has a complete control over public expenditure. Now, sometimes this is debatable is basically because we cannot say it as a complete control. However, we do always see all of these important things under the budget. Now, what are they? The very first important thing is the presentation of budget. Just give me a second. The very first important thing is the presentation of budget. So what do you mean by presentation of budget? This is a day on which the budget is presented. So from 2017 onwards, you should understand that the general budget is amalgamated with railway budget. So earlier it so happened that you had two different budgets, but then the government had amalgamated these two into one single budget. So normally it happens in the first day of February, right? And this is given under Article 112 in the Constitution of India, which is called as Annual Financial Statement. You should remember that this goes in an order. Okay, so what has been given in the slide here goes in an order. It starts with presentation of budget and then it goes with a general discussion. So what happens when the finance minister, the president is a cause to lay the annual financial statement before the parliament, and that's it's given under Article 112. Who is a cause to lay the annual financial statement? It is always the president. And where does he do it? And he can authorize anybody. Normally, since the finance minister is an executive who is responsible for all of the finances in this country, especially from the government side, and she being the finance minister is responsible for the presentation of budget. And whenever the budget is presented, normally nobody should interrupt her when she is presenting the budget. Right now, the finance minister is a lady, so when she is presenting it, it becomes the duty of the parliamentarians to listen to the budget. Okay, so after the presentation is done, then it goes into the general discussion. So the second thing is general discussion. Mind you, 4 times these around 4, 5, 6 important attributes. Mind you, around 4 times these 6 important attributes have been asked in UPSC Prelims. You might ask this in a chronology, and that can come across as an option. So please do understand, the very first chronology is presentation of budget. Who presents it? It's always a finance minister, and then the general discussion. So after the budget is presented, then there'll be a general discussion from the parliamentarians. Once the parliamentarians do a general discussion, then it will be a scrutiny of departmental committees. So here there'll be a break. So the parliament is adjourned. And once the parliament is adjourned, this provides an opportunity for all these departmental standing committees. So it is we call it as DRCs, departmental related standing committees, DRSC. These departmental related standing committees shall make a report. So it will be around 10 days or 15 days of time in which they are supposed to provide a report. And what do? They make a scrutiny of the budget. Normally in a budget, it contains, as you all know, the exact assessment of the revenue of that year, the financial year, and it also comprises of the expenditure. So it is asking, see, the parliamentary control over public expenditure means without the approval of the parliament, the government is not authorized to take and spend even a single penny out of the Consolidated Fund of India. Now, we will also discuss about the different types of funds. We have 3 different types of funds. So one is called as Consolidated Fund of India. The second one is called as the Contingency Fund of India. And the third one is called as the Public Accounts Fund. So, if the government has to use this fund, then the authorization has to be provided by the parliament. And this is why it is always called as parliamentary control over public expenditure. So herein, after the budget estimates have been presented, and once the break is given, now these departmental related standing committees goes through what are these receipts and what are these assessments given by various ministries and departments. Once they go into these assessments, they do a scrutiny of it and a report is prepared. And once the parliament reassembles, that's when they are supposed to give all of these report. Now, immediately after that, voting for demand for grants. Now, in fact, in between, there will be something called as discussion of demand for grants. Now, what is the discussion here? Let's say that I am a minister from large scale enterprises. So I will seek around, some lakhs of crores for my ministry and department. And I'll start providing justification for it. So it so happens that the departmental related standing committees already have a report related to it. So then the parliament starts asking, why is that you require this 1 lakh crore of rupees? So therefore, this departmental related standing committees are responsible to scrutiny the budgetary estimates which are made by individual ministers and departments, which has been provided to the finance ministry and which is provided by the government then. So therefore, there shall be a discussion. So each minister shall ask and seek funds from the parliament, and that happens during the discussion of demand for grants. And that's where he can ask, I require this amount of money for some kind of a program which is being implemented in this year. So these are the things what we need to understand in the discussion of demand for grants. Immediately after that, there shall be voting of demand for grants. Now, not all demand for grants are discussed, but then all demand for grants are voted. I repeat this point, not all demand for grants would be discussed. However, all demand for grants should be voted. If it is not voted, then it's not a demand for grant at all. It means that it does not go into the appropriation. So basically, this process of voting of demand for grant happens using a procedure called as guillotine. Now, what is this guillotine? Guillotine is a procedure of making sure that whether the demand for grant is discussed or not, it is put into voting. So that's where we use this term called as guillotine. Guillotine ends that it is discussion. Now it's the time of voting. And this is organized by a committee called as Business Advisory Committee. So these are certain important things from the static. But then some of these committees were in news in the parliament recently. So you have to remember them. So immediately after this, after the voting of demand for grant is done, then the appropriation bill. And once the appropriation bill is done, the next one is the finance bill. So this goes in an order. Please do remember this. So there are 7 attributes here. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7 attributes. So this goes into a chronology. So you have to remember all of them, right? So for your examination point of view. Okay, let's move ahead with the next important slide. So I did say about the 3 important funds. In India, according to the constitution, we have 3 important funds. The very first one is called as Consolidated Fund of India. The second one is Public Accounts Fund, and the third one is Contingency Fund. What do you mean by Consolidated Fund of India? Consolidated Fund of India is a fund which is a formal revenue of Government of India. Anything which the government pays, right, as a revenue to somebody, anything which the government pays as an interest for all of the loans which it has received, anything which the government gets as a revenue, so that is under this fund called as Consolidated Fund of India. In other words, this is a formal revenue of Government of India. So anything which the government spends as an expenditure, or any revenue which goes to the name of the government, or any interest payments done in the name of the government, all of that goes into Consolidated Fund of India. Parliament's authorization is required to spend money from the Consolidated Fund of India, without which it is not authorized to spend the money. Okay, so the next one is called as the Public Accounts Fund. So what do you mean by Public Accounts Fund? As the name itself suggests, it belongs to the people of this country. So therefore, the parliament is not supposed to spend this for other purposes. Well, these are the fund which is related to a small savings certificate, pension, national savings certificate, etc. So as the name itself suggests, it belongs to the public. Again, parliament has to make sure, the government has to make sure that it is taking the authorization from the parliament in order to use the fund. But then the government is not supposed to use it for any other purposes, because the name itself suggests it belongs to the people. The last one is called as Contingency Fund. It is also called as the Emergency Fund. So what is this emergency fund? As the name itself suggests, this shall be used during emergencies. So well, we need to understand this. This is impress placed before the President of India. Why does impress placed before the President of India? Is because the President is an authority who is considered to be the constitutional head of the country, and even in the case of financial emergency, he is the one who is responsible for proclaiming financial emergency. So in case of grave contingencies, in case of financial crisis, money can be used from contingency fund. So this is the whole idea. This is the logic behind it. However, we have never used this. In fact, in some of these natural calamities and so on, we have a separate fund, which is from the disaster management fund, and there are two funds there. One is the state disaster management fund, and the other one is the central one, the central disaster management fund. Apart from that, you also have the Prime Minister Relief Fund. You have different funds there where the money is being given by the government for certain calamities, especially on the natural calamities or some disasters. Well, however, in case the constitutional makers had made a provision thinking that supposing if the money is not to be there in these two funds, there should be some kind of an emergency fund. It's like, in our purse, normally what we do is we keep, at least 500 or 1000 or 1500 as an emergency. We do not withdraw this if at all, if you have the habit of keeping cash in your purse. So what you do is you have a secret pocket within your purse where you keep around 500 or 1000 rupees. That's like, you should think that it is contingency fund. However, it is not sufficient. Please do understand it's not sufficient. This government had increased from 500 to that of 5,000 crores. That's the present contingency fund. Well, this 5,000 crore for the entire India is too less. But then this is an idle money. So India is not rich a country to keep like 50,000 crore. India is not rich a country to keep like 5 lakh crore. 5 lakh crore is a budget of a state in India. Or 3 or 4 states put together has this budget of 5 lakh crore. In fact, 5 lakh crore becomes the budget of 2 or 3 important ministries. So therefore, India has kept around 5,000 crore. And the logic behind it is to make sure that there is some kind of emergency fund, in case of some kind of exigencies. So let's move on with the next topic. So the next important thing when we speak about the control by the parliament, now we have to know about the parliamentary committees. So basically when we speak about the parliamentary committees, there are two sets of parliamentary committees. The first set of parliamentary committees are called as the permanent committees. The second set of parliamentary committees are non-permanent or temporary. So we also call this as ad hoc. So a joint parliamentary committee is an example of ad hoc committee. What these committees do is, now these committees are constituted for a purpose. Once they finish it, they cease to exist. So that's how these committees do work. All right. So, well, in the case of permanent committees, one of the example of permanent committee is the financial committees, right? Public Accounts Committee is one such important committee which is considered to be one of the oldest committee which was in existence from 1921. The most important Public Accounts Committee. Now, why is that it is the most important committee is basically because this upholds financial transparency and accountability. Now, this is one committee which works in tandem to that of the report of the C&AG. So, as in, once the C&AG makes his report and submits this to the Parliament, the PAC, that's the Public Accounts Committee, makes another report of it. So, it is responsible to scrutiny the audit reports which are mentioned by the C&AG. So, that is why we have the Public Accounts Committee. Apart from that, it looks into the appropriation accounts of it. Now, it is one of the important committee which comprises of both Rajya Sabha as well as Lok Sabha members. So, the total number of members in this committee is 22, 15 from Lok Sabha and 7 from Rajya Sabha. So, this is what you see in the case of Public Accounts Committee. One of the oldest committee in the Parliament. It is responsible to scrutiny the audit report of C&AG. It is also called as eyes, ears and tongue of C&AG. Is basically because it uses the report of C&AG and prepares another report. There are cases where in the case of 2G scam, for example, the Public Accounts Committee made another report from the C&AG, and in fact the government was reprimanded after this. So normally the convention is, the parliamentary convention is, the opposition party, the leader of the opposition party shall be the chairperson of this Public Accounts Committee. In the present case, Mallikarjuna Kharge was it. However, there are a lot of changes which we see it in case of parliamentary convention. It all depends on the rules made by the parliament, especially it depends on the rules which is made by the Lok Sabha Speaker and also the chairman of Rajya Sabha. Well, so this is about Public Accounts Committee. So let's move on with the next important committee. The next committee is Public Sector Undertakings Committee. As the name itself suggests, it is responsible for assessing the conditions and the working of the public sector undertaking. Now, this is an era of disinvestment and the government of India gets largest source of revenue from that of disinvestment. So this public sector undertaking committee, what it does is it examines the report of all public sector undertaking. It reviews the working of it. Now, after reviewing the working of it, it will make sure that those sick enterprises which is taking more amount of money from the government, now that will be privatized. Now, all of this is again based on the report which is made by the Public Sector Undertaking Committee. Again, the composition of this committee is 22. That's 15 from Lok Sabha and 7 from Rajya Sabha. So this is what you see as the composition in the case of Public Sector Undertaking Committee. The next important committee is the Estimates Committee. He has asked about the Estimates Committee, Public Accounts Committee twice, especially in the year 2014. He had asked a question on this. Estimates Committee, there was an easy question in 2015. Which among the following are the largest committee in the parliament? And that's Estimates Committee is basically because it comprises of only Lok Sabha members. So it comprises of around 30 members in the committee. Since Estimates Committee comprises of only Lok Sabha members, therefore the other two committees, the other two financial committees comprise of both Rajya Sabha as well as Lok Sabha members. So what does Estimates Committee do? It is responsible to look into the budgetary estimates which is made by the budget, especially by the government. And what it does is it suggests financial prudency. And once it suggests the financial prudency, it can also say where there is loss of money and how to save this loss of money. So therefore, in doing so, what it does is it suggests certain alternative policies to overcome these kind of a problem. So these alternative policies are a suggestion which can be given by the Estimates Committee to the government to make sure that there cannot be any leak of finances or any wastage of finances or any wastage in terms of expenditure or any wastage of some money which is affecting the government in any case. So therefore, suggestion of alternative policy is one of the recommendation given by Estimates Committee. They suggest an alternative policy, and it also examines the limits of the policy which are implied in the estimates. For example, in case of the demand for grants, sometimes the budgetary estimates would be more in case of certain departments or certain ministry. So what it does is it examines and makes sure that there is holistic distribution of resources, especially financial resources, amongst all of the committees. Of course, it is responsible to hold the financial transparency and accountability. All of these three committees, all of these three financial committees are responsible to uphold financial transparency and accountability. So this is what you see in case of the Estimates Committee. So these are the three important financial committees what do we have, right? So please do understand the committees in the parliament, the permanent committees in the parliament. Under the permanent committees in the parliament, you have these three important committees. It starts with Public Accounts Committee. The second one is the Public Sector Undertakings Committee, and the third one is Estimates Committee. So Estimates Committee comprises of 30 people, and they all come from Lok Sabha. And there was one question which was asked in the case of prelims in 2015, and which said which among the following is the largest committee in the parliament, and it's Estimates Committee. All right, so let's move on with the next topic. So the next topic is about the departmental standing committees. Now, which are these departmental standing committees? We had already discussed about this during this parliamentary control over public expenditure. I told you about the steps there. So what comes first? First one is the presentation of the budget. After that, it is the general discussion. So after that, there is an adjournment, the third stage. After that, it is during the adjournment. After the adjournment, what happens? The departmental standing committees, there will be an adjournment of 15 days, a short recess period, a short period in the case of the parliament, where all of these departmental standing committees starts making a report on these estimates, the budgetary estimates. So when they make a report on the budgetary estimates, so they present this report once they come back to the parliament, once the parliament, resumes its session. So how many departmental standing committees do we have? We have 24 of them, and all of them have common members. And what is the strength of the departmental standing committee? It is 31, out of which 21 are from Lok Sabha and 10 are from Rajya Sabha. Mind you, the departmental standing committees are permanent committees. They work for a year. All of these financial committees will also work for a year. Okay, so this is what you need to understand. So the departmental standing committees normally work for a year. So what do? They are responsible for considering demand for grants, as I told you, as I discussed. And sometimes what they do is, these departmental standing committees also examine the bills pertaining to individual ministries and departments whenever these individual ministries and departments want to come out with a new policy, right? And any bills related to that ministry or department, let's say that the Ministry of Rural Development has come out with a bill altogether in order to provide more policy or related to modification of Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme or a Guarantee Act. So in that case, the departmental standing committees associated with it is responsible to look into the purview of the bill and suggest any changes or make a report related to it. Apart from that, what it does is it prepares an annual report, and in the annual report it submits before the parliament and tells what are the important findings which these departmental standing committees have done with respect to their area of functionality. And they are also responsible for providing national basic long-term policy documents. So what they do is they make sure that these long-term policy documents will always be an input for the parliament for the future bills or for the future law or the future legislation. All right. So let's move ahead with the next topic. So the next topic is about the governor and the state executive. So whenever we speak about the governor and the state executive, please do understand it's similar to that of the president and the prime minister, right? So here it is the governor and the chief minister, right? So how is the governor elected? He is not elected, he is appointed. So he is appointed for a period of 5 years. So there are a lot of question on governor, the role of governor. Recently, you should also understand the spat between the governor. I've taken this topic, I would have skipped this in this rapid revision series, but since Tamil Nadu is a solid example of the politicization of governor and a spat between the chief minister there, Stalin, and also the governor there, where the Supreme Court had to interfere. So let's try to understand, let's try to attempt the constitutional position of the governor and wherever there are certain loopholes in the case of the constitution. First of all, he is appointed. He is appointed for a fixed term of 5 years. So his tenure is 5 years. However, please do understand, sometimes he does not get this 5 years because the Constitution of India states that the governor is appointed by the president and he holds his office during the pleasure of the president. What he does? He holds his office during the pleasure of the president. Now herein what we need to understand is the pleasure of the president should be understood as the pleasure of the prime minister. So prime minister supports or provides the aid and advice to that of the president to appoint certain people to those states where there is a vacancy or they want to create a vacancy or change the governor. So the pleasure of the president means the pleasure of the prime minister. Now the question is, what if the governor does not get the 5 years? Now it's up to the president. But then in the case of the question paper, supposing if you get a statement that the governor holds his office during the pleasure of the prime minister, it becomes wrong. You should always assume, you should always remember that it is the pleasure of the president. That's what has been given in the constitution. That has been given in the constitution. Well, the understanding is pleasure of the president is pleasure of the prime minister is basically because the president does not have a discretionary power, as you all know. The governor has. However, in this case, he is always bound by the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister. So that's how it works. So there are cases where the Supreme Court of India has very clearly said that even though the governor has lost his 5 years, it is up to the president to decide with respect to it. Okay. So what are the conditions of governor's office? His salaries and his allowances shall not be changed for his disadvantage, right? So that is one of the important conditions of the governor office. And number two is the governor normally should be a person other than that of the state. Normally, a person from the same state should not be appointed as the governor. And it is also a constitutional convention that whenever a governor has to be appointed, the president need to speak to the chief minister and also consult the High Court. Now, if it is necessary. Normally, it is to have a smooth functioning of the government. Is basically because we follow Canadian model of federation where the center is more powerful than that of the states. What is happening whenever the ruling party comes to power? Now, it will start controlling those states which has an opposition rule. So what it does is using its own members from the same political party, the Prime Minister makes sure that his man has been appointed in various states. So these governors, they start listening to the central government rather than following the constitution. That's where the friction starts. Sorry if I've used, if I'm crude here, but then that's how it is happening even in the past. And I suppose in the recent developments, we see this, right? So the governors should always exercise their duties and responsibilities looking into the constitution, not acting in a different way altogether. All right. So, well, what are the qualifications to become a governor? The qualification to become a governor. And one more thing, the governor's appointment is very, very important, is basically because governor is also involved in appointing certain important people, including the High Court judge. In fact, the appointment of High Court judge, again, it happens through the collegium system. However, the governor's role is important, and the term which we use there is called as participative consultative process. What is this participative consultative process? The participative consultative process is where you normally have the governor is being consulted by the Honorable Chief Justice and the senior most judges of the Supreme Court before appointing the Chief Justice and the High Court judge of that state, corresponding state. So that's where the governor's role is very, very important, is basically because he is the constitutional head and he should be a man not from the same state. So therefore, whenever you see a governor in any state, even today, will not be belonging from the same state. He'll be from a different state altogether. If he is an active politician from the same state or retired from the politics from the same state, even otherwise, right, if he is knowing certain people, this will open up more opportunities for favoritism and nepotism. So therefore, this constitutional convention is being followed across all political parties, and from 1952 till date, all of the governors are generally not from the same state. Okay. So the next one is the qualification. He shall be a citizen of India, shall have attained 35 years of age, shall not hold any office of profit, shall be qualified to be a member of State Legislative Assembly, because his role to the State Legislative Assembly is more than that of the State Legislative Council. As you all know that we do not have State Legislative Council everywhere. So this is what it is with respect to the governor. Talking about the powers of the governor, he has similar powers as that of the president. So it starts with the executive power, then the legislative power, then the financial power and the judicial power. As you all know that the governor enjoys the discretionary power. So if at all, if there is a question who enjoys the discretionary power between the governor and the president, it's always the governor who enjoys the discretionary power. And we see that with respect to the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers with the CM. I'll give you an example in the next slide. Well, talking about his executive power, of course, executive power, he uses the aid and advice, but then he is not bound by aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. Headed by CM. But not in all cases, He is bound by, he is not completely bound by. He is not completely bound by this. So this is what we need to understand. So it's the executive power. So the most important constitutional authorities of the state would be appointed by the governor. So he appoints the chief minister, appoints the council of ministers based on the recommendation of the chief minister. This is what we need to understand. And apart from that, we should also understand that he is the chancellor of all universities, especially the government universities in the state. He appoints the Advocate General. He constitutes the State Finance Commission. He constitutes the State Election Commission. Mind you, these two are related to the local bodies, urban local bodies as well as the rural local bodies. State Finance Commission is responsible for suggesting the distribution of revenue between the state as well as the local bodies, while at the same time the State Election Commission does not have anything to do with that of the Election Commission of India, while the State Election Commission is responsible for conducting the elections of the local body. So the most including the Advocate General, most of the important constitutional authorities, they are appointed by the governor under the executive power. He is also responsible for appointing special officers of linguistic minorities within the state, and then also special officers of scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, just to assess the situation of these castes and also the backward classes. Next, legislative power. Like that of the president, the governor also has a legislative power. Number one, he is responsible for proroguing the house. What is a prorogue? Prorogue is a gap between the last time of the session where it has been met till that of the next session's first meeting. So the gap, we call it as prorogue. Normally it's an end of the session. Okay, so whenever there is an end of the session, the governor calls it as a prorogue, but then this does not happen in reality. So, but then he has every right to call for a prorogue. So he summons the session if at all, if any political party is trying to somehow escape from not proving its majority. If it has lost the majority, then the governor can call for a session, he can summon the session. So this is summoning. The third one is dissolution. He can dissolve the state legislative assembly if at all, if the political party has lost a majority, and then the tenure here is 5 years, and he is bound by the constitutional obligation. Apart from that, he is also responsible for nomination of 1/6 member to the state legislative council from literature, science, arts and social service. Along with that, you also have cooperative movement. So these are certain legislative powers. Of course, all bills would become an act after the governor signs it. One of the most important thing what the governor has here is the reservation of bill to the president. Now, the controversy with respect to Stalin and N. Ravi, who was the governor in Tamil Nadu. So what's the controversy? See, normally you all know that the speech which is prepared by the government, and the governor addresses the very first session of the state legislative assembly. And when the speech is handed over to the governor is obligated to read the speech, right? And he should read it, similar to that of the president. But in this case, what the governor did was, the governor omitted certain parts of the speech, so which has angered some of the state legislative assembly members, MLAs of DMK, which is a ruling party in the case of Tamil Nadu, and that's where the controversy started. Well, the Supreme Court is very clear on this, and there is some gap here is because the Constitution of India does not prescribe anything to it. But then if you see it, it means that the governor is quite obligated to read the speech which is given by the ruling party. So therefore, he speaks about the policies and programs of the ruling party for the next 1 year. There's nothing wrong, I guess. So the next one is the financial powers. What are the financial powers which the governor has? It's similar to that of the president. He is the cause to lay the annual financial statement of the state. So annual financial statement of a state is always caused to be laid before the state legislative assembly by the governor. Last but not the least is the judicial power. Judicial power is nothing but he is responsible for appointment of district judges. Number one. And all those judges who come under the district judges, there are normally two types of court under the district. The head of this district judge, the head of the district court is the principal district judge. He or she is called as PDJ. Right? And you have the civil code, you will also have the criminal code, and they follow their own chronology. What you need to understand here is the governor is responsible to appoint them based on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by the Chief Minister. However, in certain cases, he can act on his own discretion. He can just say in consultation with that of the Chief Justice of the High Court, he is supposed to do the appointment. So he can also make sure that he can transfer the district court judges. So all of that comes under the governor. Apart from that, the pardoning powers, we have already discussed about the pardoning powers of the governor. One of the most important pardoning power what he has is that he can only commute a death sentence. He cannot pardon a death sentence. He does not have any power with respect to providing relief in the case of the court martial of the military courts. He can only do pardon, reprieve, respite, remission, commutation in the case of violation of the state list. So these are some of the important powers of the governor. So let's move ahead with the next important slide. So you should know about these three important articles. Article 154 speaks about the aid and advice of the Council of Minister, while Article 163 speaks about the appointment of the Chief Minister and also the other Council of Ministers. 164 speaks about the Council of Ministers and the Chief Minister are collectively responsible to that of the State Legislative Assembly. Please do understand, it's the same explanation which we have done in the case of the President. There is no change in it. The Chief Minister has the same role and the function as that of the Prime Minister. However, you should understand that the Chief Minister does not have any qualification similar to that of the Prime Minister. When we were discussing of the parliamentary system of democracy, I did mention of how it works. All right. So let's move ahead with the next topic. The next topic is state legislature. Now, in state legislature, we have both kind of state legislature. Some state legislatures are called as unicameral. That's only one house. The second one is called as bicameral legislature. Now, the states which has bicameral legislatures are AP, Telangana, Karnataka, Maharashtra. Then you also have Bihar and UP. So these are the 6 states which has the bicameral legislature. There's a talk that Odisha is going to have a legislature council as well. So it becomes the 7th state to have a state legislature council, supposing if that happens. Well, these are the 6 states which will have bicameral legislature. Unlike in the case of the parliament, the state legislatures do not have bicameral. Not all state legislatures have bicameral legislature. Only few states of them has a bicameral legislature. So it also brings in who has the authority to introduce a state legislature council. Please do understand, this has to be done based on an initiative done by the state legislature concerned. That's the state legislative assembly concerned. However, this has to be done by the Parliament of India. Once the state legislative assembly passes a bill, then it has to be passed by the Parliament of India, and then only a state legislature council can be created or a state legislature council can be abolished. So it's an initiative by the state legislative assembly with a special majority, which is agreed by the parliament with a simple majority. Okay, so this is what it is in the case of creation or abolition in the case of the state legislature council. Well, let's try to understand how they work. So how is the abolition of the state legislature council or the creation of state legislature council? The legislature council, of course, is the upper chamber of the bicameral legislature in our country. So the article which deals with this is Article 169, and this article of the Indian Constitution provides for the establishment of all parliament by a law, as I told you, and the state legislature assembly has to pass this with a special majority, which is nothing but 2/3 majority. After it is passed with a 2/3 majority, then it goes to the Parliament, and the Parliament has to be passing this with a simple majority. The most important part of this, that's on the creation of the state legislature council or the abolition of the state legislature council, is that it shall not be treated as a constitutional amendment. So that's the last point here. So you cannot treat that as a constitutional amendment under Article 368. Well, one of the most important thing associated with this is you cannot consider the abolition of or creation of the state legislature council as a constitutional amendment under Article 368. Next, let's try to understand the composition of the state legislature council. Why a state legislature council? It can provide a secondary opinion. Most importantly, can the state legislature council initiate any bill? It can. I repeat, the state legislature council can also create any bill. It can initiate a bill. However, the journey of the bill is the question. You know, if at all if the state legislature assembly agrees to this bill, then only the bill goes to the governor, otherwise the bill stops there, the bill stalls there. So therefore, the state legislature assembly has the supremacy and the authority over the bills initiated by the state legislature in the corresponding state. So if we were to speak about the state legislature council and the state legislature assembly, who has the more authority over them, who has the more authority to create the bill, it is always the state legislature assembly. And the next important thing what you need to understand is, does the state legislature council stall the bill, hold the bill which is passed by the state legislature assembly? Yes, they can, but then they cannot do so completely. Now this is where they can hold a bill for a maximum of 3 months, not beyond 3 months, right? And they have to pass the bill, right, after 3 months. Supposing if they do not pass the bill within this 3 months, it shall be considered to be passed. So there are two journeys to the bill. First is when the state legislature assembly passes a bill to the state legislature council, and the state legislature council is suggesting an amendment, and this goes to the state legislature assembly. And if the state legislature assembly is least bothered about the amendments of the state legislature council, with or without modification, it can send it back to the state legislature council. That's where the second journey comes in. Herein, with a maximum of 3 months, they have to pass the bill, otherwise it is considered to be passed. So this is what it is when we speak about the journey of the bill. The journey of the bill from the state legislature assembly to that of the state legislature council, or otherwise is because the council, though it can initiate a bill, the bill, that is the fate of the bill, is decided by the state legislature assembly. So that's why I said the supremacy on the state bills is always with that of the state legislature assembly. Now talking about the composition, this is how the composition looks like. 1/3 of the members of the legislature assembly. It shall not be more than 1/3 of the members of the state legislature assembly, and it should not be less than 40. But then there are state legislature councils which has less than 40 strength, and this is not applicable for the smaller states. I repeat, this rule here is not applicable for the smaller states. The smaller states can have less than 40 also, right? Talking about the electoral college, that is on the composition of the state legislature council. 1/3 of the electorates comprises of municipalities and district boards and the other local bodies. 1/3 are elected by the members of the state legislature assembly. 1/12 are electorates of graduates, where they should have possessed 3 years in possession of the degree, right? So a graduation of 3 years. Next is 1/12 of electorates consisting of teachers who are not less than the secondary level. So the primary teachers are not considered here. The rest 1/6 is the nomination by the governor. All right. So that's what it is with respect to the composition of the state legislature. So the state legislature has a similar function as that of the state legislature council, but then they cannot initiate a money bill. The money bill can be initiated only by the state legislature assembly. Rule number 1. Number 2, they can discuss the money bill and they have to pass it within 14 days, otherwise it is considered to be passed. Okay, so this is what we need to understand. Rule number 3, they can initiate a bill, but then the fate of the bill, as I already told you, it depends on the state legislature assembly. So these are the things what you need to understand about the state legislature council, also on the state legislature assembly. So let's move ahead with the next important topic, and that's on the Panchayat Raj institution. Now talking about the PRIs, they were constitutionalized based on 1992, 73rd and the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act. So with respect to our constitutional provision, it's given under Article 40, Directive Principles of State Policy, and also given under Article 246. So these are the 3 important committees. Please do have a look on these committees. We do not have time to go through all of them. But then who suggested the 3-tier structure? It's Balwant Rai Mehta committee which suggested the 3-tier structure. And then you had the Ashok Mehta committee and also GVK Rao committee. So all of these 3 committees suggested important things. Ashok Mehta and GVK Rao committee brought in more and more of evolution, and that's where it encouraged direct election as well as bringing in the political parties to play there. All right. So moving ahead, What are the compulsory provisions which are given under 73rd and the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act? First of all, it starts with the unit called as Gram Sabha. That is considered to be the most important unit or the basic unit, while in the case of the municipality, it is the ward committee. Ward committee is nothing but comprising of all registered voters with respect to that area. Well, it's the same thing with respect to the Gram Sabha, all eligible voters, not elected, eligible voters who are registered, right? They are the members of Gram Sabha. Well, it's suggested for the three-tier structure. That's panchayat at the village level, and then the intermediate level, and then the district level, and in the states, and with a population of below 20 lakhs, which is given under Article 243. So this is what you need to remember. And then the seats at all levels has to be filled by direct election. This is another important thing, and I did tell you about the evolution during that time. And then the next one is the reservation. The reservation is created for the scheduled caste and also the scheduled tribe, and this is in proportion to that of the population. It's not 33%. 33% is for women reservation. However, this shall be dependent on the population of the state. Moving ahead, 1/3 of the seats have to be reserved for the women. 1/3, out of which 1/3 of the seats reserved for SC, ST. In that as well, there should be a reservation created for women. Apart from that, 1/3 offices of chairpersons of at all levels shall be reserved for women, which is given under Article 243D. And then it shall be 5 years of a 5-year term. Normally an election, once the election happens, it is for a 5-year term, and the election constitutes new bodies to be completed before the expiry of the term. Well, it is one more important thing what you need to understand is, supposing if this gets superseded, let's say that after 3 years a local body is superseded, the next elected local body will be functioning only for 2 years. Right? Of course, there are cases where high courts have interfered, and in order to solve the dispute between the state and the local bodies. In the event of dissolution, elections shall be completed within 6 months, and then there shall be an independent election commission, which is called as the State Election Commission, in order to do the superintendence and also provide a control over all electoral constituency, and in order to conduct free and fair election to local bodies. Well, apart from that, there are certain compulsory provision which was brought under the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act. One of that is the District Planning Committee, which is responsible for bringing plans and programs with respect to the state. Right? So all of that would be done by the District Planning Committee, and District Planning Committee comprises of the elected representatives as well. It comprises of the MLAs and MPs with respect to that region as well. Well, apart from this, the budgetary allocation from the state government and the share of revenue for creation of taxes, collection and retention of revenue, the central government programs and grants and Union Finance Commission grants, all of that is given under Article 243. Well, the Finance Commission in each state has to be created, which is responsible to review the financial situation of the state and to share the distribution of resources between the state and also the local bodies. So these are the compulsory provisions. So apart from that, you also had certain voluntary provisions. The voluntary provisions can be reservation to that of SCs and STs, increasing reservation to that of SCs, STs, apart from the reservation which is proportion to the state, reservation to that of the other backward communities, in order to increase the reservation beyond 33% and giving 50% of reservation to women. All of that comes across as the voluntary provision. What is the critical estimate in the working of PRIs and ULBs? First of all, number one, they are time consuming. What is time consuming here? Red tapeism. Sorry, you can cut this. You have to cut this. Please do cut it. Editing team, please do cut it. One of the critical estimates. So let's try to discuss the critical estimate and working of PRIs and ULBs. Number one of the most important thing is the political interference. Since there are political parties, so political interference are quite common. The second important thing what you need to understand is related to the financial resources. They are over dependent on the state. ULBs and the PRIs are over dependent on the state. This is what you need to understand. Number three is is bankruptcy. Number 4, though they can levy a tax, they are unable to levy a tax is basically because it might result in some kind of a backlash from the people, is because people are already paying tax. Citizens are already paying tax for the state as well as the central government. Apart from that, it is also resulting in the share of revenue between the center and the states, and then the states to that of the panchayat. So the Finance Commission also plays an important role here. So this is about the critical estimate and the working of PRIs and ULBs. Let's move ahead with the next topic. The next important topic is C&AG. That's Comptroller and Auditor General of India. So please do understand, Comptroller and Auditor General of India is one of the important pillar of democracy, especially in the Indian democracy. Well, this man works as an independent authority, constitutional authority, who is also responsible for guarding public purse in India. Well, he is in charge of a department called as Indian Audit and the Accounts Department, and he is also the guardian of the public purse in case of India. What he does is, he enshrines public accountability in terms of public expenditure, and also make sure that there is a proper accountability in the parliament by the exchequer. Basically, the ministers, the government, shall be accountable to the parliament with respect to all expenditure which is made and all the money which has been allocated by the parliament to them. So that's where the C&AG becomes extremely important. Now, how is the C&AG is being appointed? C&AG is always appointed by the president with a warrant under his hand and a seal. Who is the other authority who has been appointed like this? It's the governor. The governor is also appointed with a warrant under his hand and a seal. And what is the tenure in the case of C&AG? The tenure of office is 65 years or 6 years, whichever is earlier. How is removed? He is removed similar to that of a Supreme Court judge. How is a Supreme Court judge removed? See, Election Commission of India, that's Election Commissioner, C&AG, Supreme Court judges, all of these 3 constitutional authorities are removed through the same procedure. First and foremost, the Supreme Court judge is removed based on a ground of incapacity or misbehavior. And number 2, now if a Supreme Court judge has to be removed, then the President's addressal is extremely important. It has to be based on the recommendation of the President or order given by the President. And it can be initiated in either house with a minimum strength of 50 from Rajya Sabha and a minimum strength of 100 from Lok Sabha. It can be initiated by any members of the parliament. After that is done, they can either constitute a committee or otherwise, if each and every house passes with a special majority, which is 2/3 of the majority of present and voting, provided that it is greater than half of the total membership of the house, that's when the Supreme Court judge would be removed. Same thing applies for C&AG. This is very, very important. C&AG and Supreme Court judge, the election commissioner. However, if you have to remove the election commissioner, this has to be based on the recommendation of the President again. The C&AG, recommendation of the President again. Without the presidential order, it cannot be moved at all. The resolution to remove the Supreme Court judge cannot be moved at all. But then there is no other reason which is defined by the Constitution of India related to it. So what happens to C&AG after his removal? After he finishes his retirement, he is not eligible for any other office under the government or any other state once he retires or resigns from the post of C&AG. Well, in order to guard the public purse, he is the most important authority, and in democracy is considered to be the most important pillar of democracy, is because he enshrines financial accountability and also transparency. Let's move ahead with the next slide. So what are the constitutional provisions? These are the constitutional provisions. The first one speaks about the concept of C&AG, the Comptroller and Auditor General, his duties, and then his reporting. So he reports, who is the cause to lay the report before the Parliament of India? It's always the President. So which are the reports? We have already discussed about this. So I'm going a little fast. Why I've highlighted this here, 279. It discusses about the net proceeds of tax. I beg your pardon for my English. So instead of tax, I said facts. So it's not that. It's net proceeds of tax. What do you mean by net proceeds of tax? The amount which is deducted from the total revenue which has been collected is the amount of money which is deducted is what we get as the net proceeds of tax. So it is, you require certain amount of money to collect the revenue. So you have to deduct the amount of money which is used to collect the revenue. The final revenue, what you get by deducting the amount of money, you know, which is used to collect this revenue, is called as net proceeds of tax. And it has to be always certified by the C&AG. And in the case of regional councils and district councils, please do remember this, in the case of regional councils as well as the district councils, the regional autonomous councils, the district councils, C&AG's certificate is extremely important. Without which they are not authorized to have a collection of revenue at all. All right. So these are certain important constitutional provisions which you see it in case of C&AG. It also speaks about his removal, his duties. So in 1971, the Act of 1971 is very, very important because this Act made sure that there is a separate officer for collection of, for maintenance of accounts. Till 1971, C&AG was responsible for maintenance of accounts as well as of conducting the audit, while from 1971 onwards, he is only responsible for conducting audit of both the state as well as center. So he audits both state accounts as well as the central account, and he is responsible for maintenance of which account? The state account. However, you should also remember that the state government can pass a separate law in the state legislative assembly to remove this authority of the C&AG and give it to some other authority. Okay, I repeat this. By default, the C&AG is responsible for conducting audit of these two. Now, that is what he has. That's the power what he has. Well, if the state legislative assembly does not have any law with respect to maintenance of accounts, it does not have any other officer for the maintenance of accounts, the C&AG is responsible for maintenance of the state accounts. So if the state government does not like it, they can pass a law related to it in the state legislative assembly so that he is removed from this kind of a responsibility. Okay, all right. So what is the difference between the C&AG of UK and India? What is the difference between these two? The first one is, in case of India, he is just an attorney general. Sorry, he is comptroller and attorney general. However, he works only as an attorney general. Please do understand, he is regarded as comptroller and auditor general, but then he works only as an attorney general. Comptroller is controller of finance. He actually works as a comptroller in case of UK. Now, what do you mean by this? Without the authorization of the C&AG, the government does not have any right to take money from the treasury. That we do not see it in case of India. It actually works like a comptroller in UK, but in case of India, the name called as comptroller is used is basically because of 2 or 3 constitutional makers, and one of that was pioneer behind it to make sure that India has this comptroller and auditor general word, and his authority is T.T. Krishnamachari. They had a debate along with that of Babasaheb Ambedkar, and therefore they made sure that indirectly is also responsible for controlling the authority of finance and controlling financial resources in India and creating a financial prudency in India. Therefore, what they did was they used the word called as comptroller and auditor general, but in actual terms he is merely an attorney general. He is not a comptroller general. But in the case of United Kingdom, he is also a comptroller general. So this is what we need to understand. Number 2 is, in case of C&AG in India, he is responsible for doing a post audit, while in case of UK he can also do a pre-audit as well as a post audit. So this is considered to be more of a post-mortem report. his report is regarded as a post-mortem report, but this is not, as basically because he exercises considerable control over the government, because before the government takes money, he has to sign that, without which the government is not authorized to take the money, right? So this is what we need to understand, all right? Let's move on with the next important thing. What are the functions of C and AG? E is responsible for auditing the accounts related to all expenditure of Consolidated Fund of India. Then Consolidated Fund of each and every state, we have already discussed that. He is responsible for auditing. And then the union territories, which is having a legislative assembly as well. So Consolidated Fund of the state as well as Consolidated Fund of those union territories which has a state legislative assembly. And he audits all expenditure from the Contingency Fund of India, then Public Account of India, as well as Contingency Fund from the states as well. Next, he is also responsible for auditing all trading, manufacturing, profit and loss accounts, balance sheets, then other subsidiary accounts which is kept by any department of central government and the state government. So you have to remember these functions, because you can get this as an MCQ. Which among the following are the functions of C and AG? I don't think so, but then supposing if you have any statement like this, you should remember which are those things which CAG does an audit. There are certain things which you have to remember. CAG does not do an audit of PSU, public sector undertaking. They have a separate audit board, number one. Number two, PSU does not do an audit of RBI and some of the other important agencies which is created through an act of the parliament, because they have clearly mentioned who shall do an audit with respect to these boards or these institutions. So therefore the CAG cannot do any audit here, and CAG can do an audit which is wholly or subsidiarily financed by the government of India or government of any state. So it also includes government companies. However, there are certain statutory corporations which has clearly provided their own, it's very clearly provided in the law who shall do an audit. So there shall be an audit board for them. However, the CAG can provide inputs to them, the way in which the form of audit has to be done or the way in which the account maintenance has to be done. So these are some of the functions of C and AG. So let's move ahead with the next topic. Cut here. So the next topic is Attorney General. Now, by the way, Attorney General is very, very important. Is basically because he is regarded as the first law officer of India. Now, the Constitution of India very clearly mentions about Attorney General under Article 76. And how is he appointed? He is appointed by the President. He is not elected. And behind the President, of course, it is based on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers, headed by the Prime Minister. And by the way, this man, Attorney General, holds his office during the pleasure of the President. Here, the pleasure of the President has to be understood as pleasure of the Prime Minister, because until and unless he is in good books with that of the Prime Minister, he enjoys the office. There is no security of tenure. The normal convention is, I've seen it in many books that they have not given this, and in some cases they say that this is wrong. However, you have to understand the normal convention or the normal thing here is, once the government falls, the Attorney General has to submit his resignation. Number one. Not only this, if any of his close relatives or blood relatives, it might be including his, son, daughter, father, mother, or sister or brother, any close blood relatives, if they have filed a case against Government of India, then in that situation you shall also submit the resignation. Now, these are certain things what we need to understand about the Attorney General. So, he is being assisted by the Solicitor General. Attorney General shall be assisted by the Solicitor General. So, what are the things what he does? So, he works as the Government of India's counsel in almost all courts. So, therefore, he has a right to admissibility in all courts of India. So since he has right to admissibility in all courts of India, he can hear any court cases across India, including the Parliament of India, which is very clearly given under Article 88 of the Indian Constitution. So apart from that, he will present any cases to the Government of India in the Supreme Court or the High Court, and he can also defend any cases of Government of India as suggested by the President, and of course behind the President it's always the Prime Minister. There are certain privileges which this man enjoys, which I have already told you that he has right to, go through all court hearings. Apart from that, also in the Parliament. The first one is right of audience. As I told you, he has a right of audience in the Parliament also, and he also has right to speak inside the Parliament. Not only that, he can also participate in any debates. It can be either in Rajya Sabha or Lok Sabha. He can also attend any session in the case of the State Legislative Assembly, and he can also be a member of any committee in the Parliament. So this is another important thing. He can be a member of any committee in the Parliament. So this conceptual clarity question was asked once in the prelims. So this is important. Well, he can be a member of any committee in the Parliament. However, he does not have right to vote. He does not have right to vote. So he cannot vote. But then he can be a part of the committee. Now the next question is, being a part of a committee, but then he does not have a right to vote. Yes, this is a unique situation with respect to the Attorney General. And can he have a private practice? Yes. But then it shall not be anything which is affecting he being a counsel of Government of India. This is another important thing. And can he take up the director position? Of course, yes, but then he has to take the permission from the Government of India. If he has to become a director of any company, then that has to be informed, and he has to take the permission from the government, and then he can be a director of any company. And of course, he'll be assisted by the Solicitor General. So let's move ahead with the next topic. So the next topic is Election Commission of India. So this year is the year of elections, and we should know about the Election Commission of India. And Election Commission of India is a completely autonomous constitutional authority which is responsible for conduction of free and fair election across India. So what are the elections which the Election Commission of India conduct? The first election is the members of Parliament. The member of Parliament both for Lok Sabha as well as Rajya Sabha. The second one is the State Legislative Assembly election. We have a State Legislative Assembly election. Here what we need to understand is there is a proportion in which one MP constituency in which it has many State Legislative Assembly constituency. You can check this in Lakshmikant and also DD Basu, and how the ratio has been done and who is responsible for doing all of that, and that's Delimitation Commission. And Delimitation Commission is a statutory body, and this statutory body is responsible to submit its report before the Parliament, and the Parliament accepts it. Well, the Election Commission of India is also responsible for conducting of MLC election. That's the State Legislative Council. We also discussed about it. Then it conducts the President as well as the Vice Presidential election. So these are the things what we have to understand with respect to the elections conducted. So any of the election dispute related to the Election Commission conducting an election can be challenged in the case of election disputes in the High Court or the Supreme Court. While in the case of the President and Vice President, it is only in the Supreme Court. So this is what we need to understand. So moving ahead, what are the constitutional provisions? What do we have? This provision is important basically because this provision, Article 324, came into implementation immediately after the Constitution of India was enacted and given to the people of this country. While Article 324 speaks about the superintendent's direction and the control of elections, which is vested with the Election Commission of India. While Article 325 is no person to be ineligible for the inclusion or to claim to included in special electoral roll on grounds of religion, race, caste or sex. So there shall not be any discrimination in case of electoral rolls, and that's what it is. Article 326 makes a constitutional right because it speaks about the right to vote, where it is very clearly said that elections to the House of People and the Legislative Assembly of the state is based on the universal adult suffrage. Universal adult suffrage is having right to vote. So right to vote becomes a constitutional right, and it is also mentioned in People's Representation Act of 1951. Therefore, it is also a legal right. So it is a constitutional right as well as a legal right. The next one is 327, which speaks about the power of the parliament to make provisions with respect to elections to legislature. So the parliament is vested with, why I've brought all the provisions is basically because I'm revising this since this is an election year. So you can get any of these provisions on your question paper. Okay, so give highest importance to that of Election Commission of India, because this is one of the most important topic. Next, the power of legislature of a state to make provisions with respect to the elections to such legislature, that's given under Article 328. This again, it falls under the purview of the elections. Well, bar to interference by the courts in case of electoral matters. So related to electoral matters, how to conduct an election, the Honorable Supreme Court cannot interfere. That is what Article 329 also states. This is very, very important. So this is one of the important provision which I believe that there can be a question which can be asked. Well, moving ahead, how is the Election Commission of India appointed? So who appoints them? It's the President. President appoints the Chief Election Commissioner and the other Election Commissioner. Similar to that of the C and AG, they have 6 years of tenure and 65 years, whichever is earlier, and they enjoy the same status as that of the Honorable Supreme Court judges. And their allowances are all charged on the Consolidated Fund of India, so that it's not subjective to vote in the case of the Parliament. And they also receive the same salary and perks as given to the judges of the Supreme Court. How are they removed? We have already discussed about the removed. The CEC is removed based on the similar process as that of the Supreme Court judge. We've already discussed about the removal of the Supreme Court judge and also the C and AG in the previous topics, so you can remember that. Well, what are the functions? What are the functions which the Election Commission has? The very first important function what it has is to determine the territorial areas and electoral constituency throughout the entire country based on the report of Delimitation Commission. So based on the Delimitation Commissions Act, which is presented in the Parliament. I mean, the Parliament is responsible to do so. And what it also does is, it is responsible for updating, revise and update the electoral rolls to register all eligible voters. So any person's vote, I mean any person who is not, who is left from the electoral roll, so he has every right, electoral college, he has every right to question before the Election Commission of India. It is responsible to grant recognition to political parties and the symbols allocated to it. That's on the national political party and also on the state political parties. So please do understand the criteria, how it becomes a national political party and the state political party. You can also have a look about all of this in IAS Baba's website, so where we have updated certain things in the current affairs related to this. So you can also know about all of those political parties who have become the national political parties. Well, it is responsible for issuing model code of conduct. While please do understand, this is not given in the Constitution of India. What's model code of conduct? MCC is nothing but do's and don'ts in the case of election. Now, what exactly do we mean by this? It stipulates the amount of money which has to be spent by each and every candidate or each and every political party in a constituency. It also limits the days on which they can conduct the campaign, the days on which they should not conduct the campaign. It also limits the movement of money. It also limits certain important, criteria in order to make sure that there is maintenance of law and order. So all of that is included in Model Code of Conduct, which has always been criticized, is because when the Model Code of Conduct is in vogue, there are certain things which are do's and don'ts with respect to the government and also to all political parties. When political parties violate it, it's been alleged, it's been criticized that though being an Election Commission of India, being an independent body, it is unable to take an action against all of this. So there's always this criticism, but it is all with the appointment again, because please do understand, the appointment comes from the President, and then of course the recent updation with respect to Election Commission. So please do understand, the Chief Justice, the Supreme Court had said it had objected to that of the 3-member body. That's on the 3-member committee. Now, why is that? Because this 3-member committee comprises of the opposition leader, the prime minister, and any union minister, right? It had initially, Supreme Court said that the appointments of the chief election commissioner should be based on, they should also have a Supreme Court judge. So instead of having a 3-member committee, it had suggested 4-member committee. However, the parliament went ahead. The government introduced the prime minister, then the union minister, and also the opposition leader as 3-member committee, and this 3-member committee shall recommend a name to that of the president, and the president appoints the same person. So please do understand, 2 people from the same political party, 2 people from the government, and there being the prime minister. So who can question the prime minister? Can the union minister question the prime minister? He will definitely not do it, of course we all know, and he will only submit himself to that of the prime minister. So therefore, it's one political party's rule here in the case of the 3-member committee, which is some kind of a partisan, which you see in case of Election Commission of India. So quite unfortunate here. So it also decides on the election schedules for the conduct of elections, whether general election or by-election. So this is current affairs. Please do remember this. This is a recent one which has been done. The commission is also vested with the quasi-judicial power to settle disputes relating to splits, mergers recognized by the political parties. That's where you'll also see something called as anti-defection commission. So that's on anti-defection law, not the commission, anti-defection law, I beg your pardon. So the anti-defection law is based on the Constitutional Amendment Act. That's on 52nd Constitutional Amendment Act of 1985. All right. So let's move ahead with the next important topic. Let's move on with the next topic. The next important topic is Anti-Defection Law of 1985. Of course, this was introduced in the 10th schedule of the Indian Constitution. This was being asked once in UPSC Prelims. So what exactly does it do is to make sure that if there are any defections, it prevents defections. Now, there was this saying which happened during those times where there was a politician by the name called as Ram Singh. He changes 3 different political parties at 3 different days, 3 consecutive days just to seek power, just to become a minister. There's always a saying for this, Ayaram and Gayaram. So in order to overcome these kind of problems, anti-defection law was introduced by Rajiv Gandhi's government. However, there's a change in with respect to this anti-defection law which was introduced by Rajiv Gandhi's government to that of what is being followed right now. And in case of any defections which are done by voluntary methods, for example, if an MLA is elected from the B form of one political party, well, and if he wants to jump another political party for the sake of power, then in that case, if he submits his resignation or voluntarily gives up the membership of his political party, it leads to a defection. Number 2, supposing if a group of people, that's, less than 2/3 of them. Earlier, the original anti-defection law said, supposing if 1/3 of the legislature's party, that is 1/3 of people who have elected from one political party, if they merge with that of another political party, then there was no defection. It was not considered as defection, meaning there was no disqualification. However, later this was changed in the 91st Constitutional Amendment Act during the Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government. And that's when it was very clearly mentioned that it is not 1/3, it should be 2/3. So supposing if 2/3 of one legislature party members, so legislator party members are those people who have got elected from a political party. They are called as legislator party members. So these legislator party members, if they merge with some other political party, provided it is more than 2/3 of it, then it does not lead to any disqualification. Who decides on this disqualification? Of course, it is decided by the respective speaker of Lok Sabha and also the chairman of Rajya Sabha. So this is what it is in terms of anti-defection law. Well, what are the other important things what we need to know about anti-defection law? Point number 1, it provides constitutional status to that of political parties. So political parties get a constitutional status based on the anti-defection law. Number 2, the disqualification which is done is based on the chief whip who has been giving this recommendation to that of the Speaker of Lok Sabha or the Chairman of Rajya Sabha. So who is a chief whip? The chief whip is nothing but a party member that is a legislative party member, who provides directions to all the other legislative party members what shall be the action in the case of the parliamentary session or a state legislative assembly session. Supposing if any legislative party members of that political party, if it goes against the action of the chief whip, then there can be a whip which can be issued, and that might lead to a disqualification. So this is what it is when you have to know about disqualification. So chief whip is a person. Now, for example, in the case of legislative parties, let's say that we have BJP right now with 294, out of which there will be one person, I think it's Amit Shah, I'm not sure, but then it will be one person who acts like a chief whip. So who provides a direction to all of these 293 members. What action shall be performed in the case of the parliament? Supposing if there is any voting, if any person abstains from voting against the chief whip, it is a violation of whip. Whip is nothing but an order there, a constitutional, not a constitutional order, it's a strict direction. So if they go against this whip, if they go against this notice, then it amounts to disqualification. That is also given under the anti-defection law. So this makes sure that there is some kind of accountability with respect to all the political parties in case of, making the government, or it also prohibits corruption to an extent, not completely though. We see a lot of other things where they are, they try to find out different ways of doing corruption and so on. Well, anti-defection law of 1985 is extremely, extremely important in order to overcome the defections done by one political party member and just in the want of power to some other political party member. Some cases related to it, the recent cases, in the case of Shiv Sena, where the original Shiv Sena, of course, it was done by, in case of Shiv Sena, it is the Balasaheb Thackeray who started this political party, and his son, Uddhav Thackeray, and his grandson, Aditya Thackeray. So there was a defection of a group of people, Shinde, who defected from this, and then the Supreme Court had to interfere in this. So, well, those who defected, they were not disqualified as because they were more than 2/3 of it. But then they did not merge with BJP. They claim that they are the original Shiv Sena. And of course, Uddhav Thackeray and his son, Aditya Thackeray, both of them started fighting against this in the Supreme Court. And Supreme Court gave the verdict of using different symbols for both of them. Well, this is a different case altogether. So supposing if it was less than 2/3, then it would have amounted to disqualification. But it is more than 2/3 here. So therefore, it has not amounted to disqualification. And of course, this has not resulted in the case of merging to another some other political party. They have not merged with any other political party. So this is what it is with respect to anti-defection law. So the next topic is a constitutional amendment procedure. So you should know that it's Article 368, which deals with the power of the Parliament to amend the Constitution. Of course, there are three important things with respect to the constitutional amendment. Anything which is done with a simple majority is not a constitutional amendment. You should understand. Anything which is done with 2/3 majority, and this is done in such a case that it is within the framework of Article 368. What is 2/3 here? 2/3 of present and voting, provided that it is greater than half of the total membership of the House. Well, talking about the federation here, those things which the Parliament wants to change the federal features of the Indian Constitution, it requires a special majority from the Parliament, and at least half of the state legislative assembly has to pass it with a simple majority. So this is how it works. So if there are any federal features in which the Parliament, has to change certain things with respect to the federal features, then in that situation, it is a special majority in the case of the Parliament, and half of the state legislative assembly has to pass it with a simple majority. One of the most important thing with respect to the constitutional amendment bill is it can be initiated by any private member also. Number two, there is no joint sitting. So therefore, the Lok Sabha strength, Lok Sabha has an added advantage where it can make sure that it has the more advantage and more authority to pass this constitutional amendment bill. So these are the things which we need to understand, and the recommendations of the president is not required. However, the president needs to compulsorily sign with respect to the constitutional amendment bill. So these are certain important things with respect to the constitutional amendment procedure. Let's move ahead with the next topic. So the next topic is about the constitutional morality. So there was a means question associated with it. So I thought that there might be a question in prelims as well. Is because in the past he had asked about the constitutional government. So on 2021 and 2022 we had asked twice about constitutional government. So the answer to this question is limited government. So the answer to this question, which was asked in 2021 and also in 2022, is limited government. So what is a limited government? The government shall not encroach the rights of the people. It shall give highest importance to the liberties of the people. So that is what the constitutional government means. Well, it does not mean, see, all has a constitution. All countries have a constitution. But then, what we refer as a constitutional government is one which is democratic in nature, which gives highest importance to that of rights and liberties to the people, where the government can act according to its own wish, but then it cannot encroach the rights of the people. It has to always uphold the rights of the people. It shall not encroach. And provided, it shall also provide justice to each and every citizen where this encroachment of rights has happened. All right. So, well, in India, the constitution has its own morals. Morals are certain values. Now, where do we see all of this? First and foremost, we see that in preamble, where we have two sets of it. One are the objectives. The first one is the principles. The second one is the objective. And then we see it in rule of law. What is rule of law? Irrespective of whomsoever they are, he is not above law. Right, irrespective of his caste, creed or religion, every single person is equal before law. Right to equality, there shall not be any discrimination. Each and every person is equal in this country. So that is what we see it in case of constitutional morality as well. It's the moral what we see it in case of the constitution. And we also see these two enshrined in our fundamental rights as well. Right to freedom, this helps in attaining dignity and liberty. Apart from that, the concept of social justice, which is enshrined in the directive principles of the state policy. And we also see that social justice goes a very long way in bringing the welfare state. And of course, there are two important things in constitutional morality which we need to understand. One is the procedure established by law. The other one is a due process of law. Just to give you a quick explanation about these two, this is a narrow concept. This is a broader concept, due process of law. Last year, there was a question associated with it. Due process of law is nothing but fair application of law. That speaks about fair application. In case of due procedure established by law, in India, this is very clearly seen in Article 21 of the Indian Constitution according to the Supreme Court's judgment. It's very closely associated with that of right to life and liberty. However, what we need to understand here is it only concentrates on the procedures which is needed or the rules that is required to make a law. So herein, supposing, if any person's, right has been questioned or if any person's right has been exploited, if the law has certain rules and the rules is being followed, then in that situation, it might create some sort of an injustice to a person, right? So therefore, this is some kind of a narrow concept. However, supposing if any law which creates this kind of a problem or if this creates some kind of an exploitation, in that situation there's always a Supreme Court which can result in ultra vires. So well, the other one is due process of law. Due process of law is broader concept. This is used in United States of America. See, it's like, let me give you an example. Supposing if there is a disabled who's attending a class, if I treat the disabled as equal as that of any other person in the class, then in that becomes I'm acting according to the procedure established by law. This is an example. Since he or she is a disabled, and they might have some problems in understanding is because they'll not be able to assimilate every single thing. In that situation, what I do is I give extra concentration to them or I'll start giving extra attention to them. I take more questions than anybody. So I keep them in mind before I discuss something. That becomes the due process of law. So that is where I am doing fair application of law. These examples should suffice all of you to understand and differentiate between procedure established by law and due process of law. So imagine somebody who's disabled, who's attending this class, and then supposing if this was an offline class, and if I give overt concentration, it is fair. Why it is fair is because they are disabled. They are unable to understand is because they will not have that assimilative capacity like that of anybody else. That's the reason why fair application. Since I'm treating them equal with all of the other, that's where the procedure established by law comes into. Right? Both of that is evolved in case of India. So we see this in case of the fundamental rights as well. Right? So this is about constitutional morality. We see all of this in the constitutional morality. So I expect a question on this is because consistently on 2021 and 2022, he had asked a question on constitutional government. So the constitutional government comes under this topic called as constitutionalism. Now, what exactly do we mean by this? Constitutionalism is political philosophy, and constitutional morality features are there in constitutionalism. It also means that it's certain features which tries to control on the government's authority, and it also means that the constitutional government comes under constitutionalism. The constitutional government also comes under constitutionalism. So this is what we need to understand. And apart from that, we should also know it is the need for each and every government to make sure that if it has an authority, it cannot encroach the rights of any citizen. So constitutionalism also means providing human rights. Constitutional also means clear separation of powers between the executive and the legislature, so on and so forth. A part of that is constitutional government. So constitutional government comes under constitutionalism, which is a bigger tandem. All right. So this is what it is with respect to constitutionalism. All right. So well, let's move ahead with the next important topic. So the last topic here is on fundamental rights. So what are fundamental rights? Fundamental rights are extremely important, as you all know. So the rights are of different kinds. You know, you have a legal right, you have a constitutional right, you also have something called as the fundamental right. Now, what is a fundamental right? Which are always justiciable. So where do we see it? In Part 3 of the Indian Constitution. So from Article 12 till that of Article 35. And this is always based on the Bill of Rights of United States of America. But then what we need to understand here is the fundamental rights in case of India, given in the Indian Constitution, is broader compared to that of the American Constitution. And it is also regarded as the Magna Carta of India. So how many fundamental rights do we have? We have 6 important fundamental rights. It starts from right to equality. So I'm not going to revise all of them. This is just a rapid revision class. I'm going to, I'm not going to do it in detail. It's just a rapid revision. So I'm just going to revise each one of them so that it's important for all of you. So it goes from Article 14 to 18, right? Out of which has got which is one fundamental right, which is absolute here. The absolute fundamental right is Article 17, is because it speaks about abolition of untouchability. Article 18 is related to abolition of title. Right? So you should have already read all of this. So right to equality, of course, is the first one is equality before law. There shall not be any discrimination with respect to it. Then we have Article 15, prohibition of discrimination of any kind. Article 16 is prohibition of discrimination in the case of public employment. And then, of course, later we have abolition of untouchability, which is an absolute right, is because you do not have an exception. Article 15 has an exception. Article 16 also has an exception, but then you do not, what is an exception? Reservation is an exception. However, in 17, you do not have any exception here. So therefore, the fundamental rights are never absolute in nature. There are only one fundamental right, which is absolute, and that's the removal of untouchability. So that's absolute. So it comes with a reasonable restriction, and we also see that in the case of national emergency. All right, so where some of these fundamental rights can be suspended. Now, all fundamental rights can be suspended again, except Article 20 and 21. So this is another important thing what we need to understand. And then after that, it's right to freedom. We had discussed about right to freedom, and in connotation to that, we had discussed about some of the important cases as well. So Article 19. So it speaks about right to freedom of different kind, right to freedom of speech and expression, right to assembly, right to movement, right to practice occupation of your choice, so on and so forth. So therefore, there are 6 important rights under Article 19. Then afterwards, Article 20 speaks about prevention of arbitrary arrest. And then Article 21, right to life and liberty. Article 22, against 2 types of detention there. One is the prerogative, the other one is the punitive, the other one is preventive detention. So what is punitive detention? What is preventive detention? Punitive detention is when one person is already, as approved as a convict. Now, he's not approved, he's proved as a convict in the court of law. That's where the punitive detention comes into, that is jail after that. Well, the preventive detention is not still proved, but then he is arrested before he does a crime, before he does some big havoc, right? So therefore, that comes across as the preventive detention, and that comes under Article 22 of the Indian Constitution. And it also says that any person who is arrested, he has to be produced before the court, and if he is not, then it goes against Article 22 of the Indian Constitution, 21 and 22 of the Indian Constitution. 23 and 24 is related to right against exploitation. It's not right to exploitation, right against exploitation, where the first one speaks about prohibition of human trafficking, while the second one speaks about the prohibition of child labor. 25, 26, 27, 28 speaks about right to freedom of religion. Please do understand the Keshwananda Bharati case was related to right to freedom of religion. It was challenged on the right to freedom of religion, right to manage your own religious institution. While 29 and 30 is related to the cultural and educational rights. That's linguistic minorities and cultural and educational rights. And 32 is nothing but the writ petition. Under the writ petition, you have habeas corpus. What do you mean by habeas corpus? Habeas corpus is any person who is, arrested. He has to be produced before the court within 24 hours. If he is not, excluding the travel time, if he is not, then it calls for writ of habeas corpus. It's called writ of habeas corpus. Writ is nothing but an action given by the High Court or the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court gives it, it is under Article 32. If the High Court gives it, it is under Article 226 of the Indian Constitution. That's how it works. Well, apart from that, what you also need to understand is the second one is mandamus. Mandamus is initiated against any public authority asking him to do his duty properly. Any public authority who has failed to do his duty, you are asking him to do his duty. So that is what it is when you speak about mandamus. The third one is prohibition. What is prohibition? This is an act given by the higher court to that of lower court not to exceed its jurisdiction. Well, this is done before they do a judgment. While on the other hand, you have something called a certiorari, in which the act here is to cancel any judgment done by the lower court is because they have exceeded the jurisdiction. So the difference between prohibition and certiorari is very simple. One is before the judgment, while the other one is after the judgment and cancelling the order. Well, that is what it is. And last but not the least is quo warranto. You're asking the qualification of a public authority. What is his qualification to hold the office? This prevents the encroachment of any private individual of the public office. These are the 5 types of writs which are initiated by the Supreme Court under Article 32, while the High Court under Article 226. Right? You have these 2. Well, so I'll stop it at this fundamental rights, and I hope I have covered almost all important topics. Well, do make maximum use of it. I beg your pardon if I have not covered certain topics here, since it is just a help, a summary for your revision of Indian polity and governance. I've covered all the important current affairs topics then and there when I was doing the topics here, the polity and governance topics. Of course, I'm not able to cover almost all topics here related to current affairs because, of course, it's a blend of both current affairs as well as the static topics. I'm pretty sure this would help you in some sort of revision. So, please do make use of it. Thank you very much.